We are back and really excited about my guest today. He is Drew Pierce, the managing partner of Sachs Media, a strategic communications company. And we're going to get into a number of different topics that can help you in your business and with everything that's going on right now. So, Drew, I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on. I feel like this is great. Every time we meet up, I feel like we have really good conversations. And so now we get to have one with an audience.
That's right. I feel the same way. We've met at a couple of conventions on a panel together, saw each other about a month ago at Funders Forum. Yeah, really looking forward to this. Tell the audience a little bit more about yourself, fill in some of those blanks and who you are and how you got started with Saks.
I've worked at Sachs Media for a little over 12 years now. One of my first roles after graduating from college, and have just fallen in love with it. We do strategic communications, particularly like on big issues. So we're trying to look at what is it on public policy, what is it on storytelling. Obviously, kind of like the flavor of the month these days has been AI. How are people integrating that into accomplish their business goals? That's what we do. We've got a good team of people that really does it across the country and does it exceptionally well. And I love it because I feel like I get to learn and I get to see some of the examples, some of the case studies, some of the new tools and technologies that are coming out that are kind of on the cutting edge. Some of them fizzle out quickly, some of them keep going, but it's just cool to get a front row seat to that, what's happening.
Specifically regarding AI, there's something new every day. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of different apps, websites, and technology companies building them out. So dive into that a little bit more deeply. What do you do and Saks do? So it's not just one specific industry, right?
So we do a lot of work in the financial services space, a lot of work in the business, but then also a lot of work in technology. The reality is that you've got 50 states that are each trying to tackle innovations in technology, innovations in business finance, innovations in kind of what that regulatory framework looks like. Obviously, on the federal level, we just had a significant turnover, and there's growing pains, there's challenges and opportunities that come with that. But it all kind of boils down to policymakers are looking to find solutions to a lot of the things that you see in the headlines, a lot of the big challenges that people are talking about. And business owners and business-minded people are looking to policymakers to say, is there certainty? Can I grow my business in this environment? Is there a lane for me to take whatever idea, whatever concept that I have and I'm passionate about, for me to have enough of a runway to get off and to really try something cool, try something exciting? So that's where we find ourselves, is being able to tell stories and being able to shape public perceptions on what policy looks like, which is, again, it changes constantly, not only across the country, but even just based off of different political dynamics.
That's kind of that bridge, if you will, of communication, right? So from the different stakeholders, business owner to politician and everything in between is kind of where you're at. Okay.
Exactly.
So give me something that you can share or you're currently working on.
One example is this. You look at it and you say, okay, everybody's familiar with the First Amendment. First Amendment protects people's speech. The thing is that every decade or every generation, there's a new concept of what that looks like. And so in previous years or previous generations, it was like, what does this look like for a newspaper? And there have been like landmark cases on that. We've recently been working on a multi-year project that is kind of like defining what does the First Amendment mean for people's speech online? Do you have the ability to say what you want? Are platforms the community square and like the town hall square that people are familiar with? These big companies, social media platforms that we're all using on a daily, hourly basis, are those the digital square? Well, the reality is that you ask 10 elected officials, and they're probably going to have 10 different ways, 10 different approaches to regulating that. So how can you come out there with a story that creates business clarity, but then also says, hey, you've got some of these players out there that are the giants that are already publicly traded millions and millions or billions of dollars. But then you've also, Shane, if you and I want to start our own company, what does that regulatory framework look like? What if we want to create a space that allows people to talk and to share about these? That's kind of the intersection of what communications looks like, public perceptions, and then public policy. And again, the business community is craving certainty. They want to see, what does this look like? Because they don't want to be bothered by regulations or have that uncertainty. They want to know, I've got a lane to run in.
Right. And that's even, it applies to the Reddits of the world, Facebook's
Yeah.
obviously, and then smaller ones. I mean, even look, Thunder Intel, very small, but it's the same concept as far as having a community forum and who is going to be responsible for that speech on that forum. Is it me?
Exactly.
The company? Is it the user? It's user generated content. Very important topic. And I guess nothing necessarily has been passed that you know of recently, right? I think that there are still cases going on.
Yeah, there was a couple. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled probably about a little less than a year ago on one particular case where they said, "Hey, content moderation, who's in charge? Is it the states? Is it platforms?" And they basically said, I don't know that it's the states right yet, but we still got to work through that. And so that's one of the recent cases. But this technology, if this is an area that excites you, there's so much going on in it. Like we've talked about AI a lot. A lot of states right now are tackling decisions on how can you use AI? Can insurance companies use AI to look at claims data and then make decisions about your premiums, whether that's in auto insurance, life insurance, health insurance? Is there a limit to that? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? And I think that's a source of debate. People can have different perspectives on what that looks like. I use a lot of AI. Of course, I think 90+% of your audience is using ChatGPT or something else like that for daily things. But when you look at some of these new tools that are out there, especially on like the higher level ways, it is transformative, and it's kind of like this emerging space that there isn't. It's a gray zone when it comes to a regulatory framework.
Right. And let's dive into that a little bit more. We talked a little bit offline as far as the things that I use on a daily basis for the business, for personal, Gemini and ChatGPT and Perplexity. And there's others that are just think about it, like Grammarly is using AI
Yeah.
to an extent, right? How does that impact your job and business? Obviously, you're communicating what they're looking for. Everything's changing because of it and the different use cases. How does that impact you and your business?
What I'd say is this is I think what has been cool and I think is even more recent. It used to be is I had tools that I used, and then we have AI tools, and those were separate. Now it's the tools that I already used are integrating AI in a better way. At least a handful of examples of that. Like, Microsoft has gone full speed into Copilot and what that looks like, and being able to integrate that into tools that people already use on their daily basis. I saw somebody was sharing how it's like when you're using Microsoft Word, back in like the 90s or early 2000s, you'd have like Clippy, your little paper clip that's out there.
Oh, yeah.
Now Copilot's already out there and is like the advanced version of that. You look at Adobe, Photoshop, and the entire suite there. They're using generative AI in ways that are insane, where you can just whenever you've got that a photo and somebody's photobombing you pretty much just like color them out and it just makes them disappear. Even a talented graphic designer, 30-40 minutes to perfect something like that is now done almost instantly. Wix is a site that people have used to build websites for years and years and years, and now you can kind of put in a prompt, and some of the tools that Wix has really just can create almost instantly, and you don't need to hours and hours of your coding boot camp or degree. It's just almost instantaneous now.
Yeah, and I love it because actually that's what my website is on is Wix. I've been using, they had a new tool for their marketing agent, I guess. So it's basically agentic AI now where you're putting in some information, they ask you some information, put it in, and then it's creating ongoing social media posts, email campaign,
Yep.
optimizing SEO, all these suggestions, and then you have an option to approve or dismiss. It saves a huge amount of time. Even if it's the wrong copy, the concept for that post or that email is good to where, all right, I make a few edits and then go from there. So I would agree with you absolutely for Wix. And I did just think of something. Some state just passed, I can't remember which one, it might have been like New Jersey or something. You have to have a disclaimer in video, images, or whatever, both if it's AI generated that can make an impact. Are you familiar with that?
So that's a lot of states are tackling that. I'll have
Okay.
to look up and see which ones have actually passed it, but a lot of them are saying what is like images or audio. That's another big one that is generated by AI. Are you going to have to disclose that? Are you going to have to be able to share that? The cool thing is a lot of these companies are self-regulating. In the absence of a clear regulatory framework, they're coming out there and saying, something in the metadata of an image that says like, that you could look up and see right click properties and you see this was generated by AI. Certainly there's a lot of self-regulation and actual regulation happening when it comes to abuses of AI and deep fakes and things like that. And we've seen, unfortunately, a lot of scandals where, private photos have been shared that aren't actually real. And so a lot of companies are tackling that. I think it was it Tom Hanks was the guy about a year or so ago. He was used in some sort of ad. It wasn't actually him. And I feel like that was the first, at least first big case. But it has happened so many times since then. And again, states are tackling it and regulation tends to lag behind. And so it's cool to see companies step up to propose their own solutions.
Right. I think it's going to be needed and more of it to come. All right. So we've gone to depth about a good amount of what you guys are doing. Anything specific this year that is affecting your business? Obviously, we've had some movement in economics and the tariffs and so forth. That's really the hot thing going on right now because markets are up and down every day. Or even talk about that and then what else?
I mean, I think what's interesting is, who knows whenever this podcast airs, it could be an entirely different world, what it looks like from a stance at the federal level. But the reality is, I think that when you're in a time where in President Trump's first 100 days, he's got a lot of big issues that he's tackling, that he's looking to make an impact. He's made a lot of promises, made a lot of commitments to the American people, and is working to fulfill those promises. That's a period of uncertainty. There's going to be a lot of change. And so I think that the need to communicate effectively, to communicate concisely, and really to tell powerful stories is never greater than a period of uncertainty. For all of time, people are always going to be captivated by a good story. The writing and the ability to communicate in a way that is unique and that grabs people's attention is a currency that I don't think ever gets, ever loses value in that sense. And even with the rise of AI, every time there's a new technology, it kind of like the pendulum swings one way and then it kind of finds its center. Right now, you could put in a prompt and say, "Hey, write a children's book for me, or write a book for me," and it can spit out 10,000 words in probably about a minute or two. But are those words are almost going to be an amalgamation of kind of like the average content out there, whereas you see people who stand out and they've got writing that is unique, writing that stands out. And I think if you are a business owner, if you're an association, if you're an organization that is looking to stand out, whether you're doing that from a public policy standpoint, you're trying to reach elected officials to get whatever advocacy priorities you're trying to get passed, or if you're a business owner trying to reach customers, the ability to be able to stand out and to say something that's unique, I think has never been greater, because the ability for there to be so much noise out there has also never been greater. And so anything that can cut through the noise is really going to be something that's interesting. And you see so many people who are able to stand out. We were talking about James Clear is a lot. Cody Sanchez is another person whose writing is unique. There's a lot of people who are in that space who you can follow them on Twitter, X, LinkedIn, all these different platforms, and you kind of see that uniqueness. And I think that's an exciting space to be in there.
And they do it so well with that limited attention span that people have nowadays, right? This quick scrolling, you get like 5 seconds at most to get the attention of someone. And so your writing better be good. I know Cody Sanchez, I follow her as well. She does a really good job. I kind of almost out of nowhere and almost like built this because I see other people replicating the topic that she's done as far as boring businesses, buying boring businesses to create wealth. All right. So a little bit more, anything else about a typical client for you?
So we work with clients that are looking to make an impact. So we will work with on financial services companies that are organizations that are looking to say, hey, how can I make sure that businesses continue to have access to capital? And we work with healthcare companies that are looking at nationally and being like, hey, the price of prescription drugs has gone up significantly. What can I do to help lower that? A lot of times we're working in like criminal justice reform. Hey, are we throwing the book at people who don't necessarily deserve it or deserve a second chance? That way, can we look at ways to optimize different public policies while still underscoring public safety? One more example is education. What education looks like, especially in K through 12 education, has changed dramatically in the last 20 years. You're seeing a big movement of people being able to look at schools and say, hey, we're not going to create a one size fits all approach. We're going to look and see, some kids want to engage in. There's one school in Central Florida that's incredibly science focused, and they're part of the public school system, but they've said, hey, we're going to really be focused on like STEM, all this area, even from a young age. So I think they had some of their experiments were on like one of the more recent flights to the space station. So you've got these cool areas that really, in my opinion, make an impact on our daily lives, even if it's in a small way. And that's what our firm does. That's what we really focus and specialize in. We say that our why is we want to be at the end of the year when we're kind of looking back at everything we did. We want to say, hey, did what we work on make a positive impact? Did it help communities? Did it help states? Did it help the country? And if it did, we feel really good about that.
Wonderful. No, obviously we work in the business lending space and specific small business lending overall. And so that's how I know you guys. Talk to me about crisis situations, how you guys handle it. What's the experience like? I mean, there's honestly, just before we came on, there's another unfortunate incident, possibly a plane crash. But for companies that have some sort of crisis situation, I am curious that from your perspective, how that works and what's your experience like?
I don't want to say that it's a fun area, but it's certainly a professionally stimulating area that's something that our firm has kind of been part of the DNA of our firm since we've been around. I'll say that we have worked on the craziest of the craziest crises, from people CEOs who've stolen millions and millions of dollars to accidents that happen that result in a loss of life. We worked on a bridge collapse down in South Florida a handful of years ago. It was the FIU bridge collapse. Yep, exactly. Where on that one specifically, I can remember being in my office with the TV on, watching the helicopter view, whatever, of that whole situation right after it happened, and within an hour being on a plane, getting down there. And I think I spent the next 36 hours in a hotel conference room just working on the media and the messaging side of that. I think we had probably about 250 media inquiries in the first 24 hours. And that's from everyone from CNN, Anderson Cooper's office calling, to the local community newspaper, and everyone in between. So I'll say every crisis is a little different. We're managing one now that's more of an international crisis that involves loss of life and investigations and things like that. But I think there are a handful of core principles that are just so important. There's always this perception, probably because of the movies or things like that, of we're trying to do a cover up, we're trying to spin things, and the reality is that's not the best approach in the short term or the long term. Gather all the facts as quickly as you possibly can, release all the bad news as quickly as you can, so you're not creating this drip of just goes on and on of the media cycle. Those are principles where you follow them, and you take an initial hit immediately, and it sucks, and it can reduce shareholder value. Oftentimes we're at odds with legal counsel and how they're perceiving or how they're recommending different approaches. But the hope is that your brand and your overall reputation survive whatever crisis, self-inflicted or not, and you go on to be in business and to fight another day.
Really fascinating stuff. I mean, mean, like you said, you see it in kind of movies or shows or something, but being behind the scenes a little is obviously different. Brings to mind a question about the news cycle. So a major story could be 24 hours and then something else happens and that's pushed to the back burner. Just really quickly, talk to me about how you think about that now with all the tons of different platforms that media news gets spread onto.
It used to be a scenario where there was a cycle. If you could get it in by like 7 or 8 p.m., you knew it would be in the next day's news cycle. That's completely gone. Even the newspapers aren't that way anymore. They operate on a 24/7 cycle, and their print newspaper is often just kind of like an add-on. But now you're not only looking at media outlets in this 24/7, you're looking at, anybody with a camera, anyone with a phone is now their own media company, publisher, really. And so that changes your strategy entirely. It can be a good thing for some situations. Again, if you've got a situation that is a crisis, the media can have short attention span. They can quickly move on to something else. But again, if you are taking the approach of, circle the wagons, we're going to try to not share any information, which often can seem like the right approach. And sometimes is even advised by attorneys of, hey, let's fight this out in the court of law. Anything we say now, can and will be used against you. But the reality is that the information almost always gets out, and it kind of creates that drip, drip, drip. And then the media cycle just pummels you every single time. And it's the repeated hits that are tough to recover from.
Sure, that makes sense. And that actually, one other question that as it brings up, with you saying that everyone has a camera, is it always that the media has to gain rights to that film to spread it, or at least the bigger media companies, asking the person who originated the video clip, for example?
So different companies will play a little different rules on it. If you go on Twitter and you ever find some sort of wild video that's kind of like the first of it, like I can remember, was it like one of the airlines, the door blew off or something like that, and the person's got like this like 10-second, shaky iPhone video. If you look in the replies, you'll see like the biggest companies out there being like, hi, can we have the rights to use your video, and we'll credit you a reply, like thumbs up emoji, and we'll do that. So I think different people use, different perspectives. The First Amendment does give some wiggle room for news entities to share the news. If you're using that footage, a lot of times people want to be on the safe side and get that. But on the flip side, going back to that bridge collapse, I remember a circumstance there where there was some footage that was released, a dash cam video or something else along those lines, and somebody had taken that footage and edited it in a very malicious way that made things that did not happen. And this was before generative AI or some of these other tools were really in more commonplace. But if a newspaper or a media outlet comes out and says that's an incorrect information, I'm going to pick up the phone immediately. I'm going to call them. I'm going to get that corrected. But what happens if some random person who is just in it for the clicks edits a video in a despicable, honestly, way? What do you do there? How do you reach out to them? So that's something that, as any organization that can face a crisis, you got to be looking at and being able to say, hey, what's going to be my approach if somebody does this?
There's so many aspects of that, right? I mean, different companies, different video. Coming back to even the AI thing now, right? How do you prevent a anonymous bot on Twitter from resharing some sort of video that's total AI, edited? All right. So what's next for Sachs Media?
Are focusing on growing our footprint, where we love working on work that matters, again, work that makes an impact. I love being in the small business space, small business finance space, because one of the roles that I get to play is I get to talk with a lot of merchants who have benefited from access to capital, oftentimes incredibly timely access to capital. And then I get to hear their story about the transformative impact that had on their business, which is really cool. So what's next for us is looking and seeing, hey, how can we have an even bigger footprint? How can we work in more states? How can we tell more stories? Last year, our firm and our team worked in 26 different states. And this year we've already exceeded that. And, who knows what it'll look like whenever we get to the end of the year. So that's just a really exciting place to be, an exciting trajectory. But it all kind of comes down to, hey, are we making an impact? Can I look back and say, this is a business owner who is able to 10x their business because of their access to capital. This is, a community that was able to benefit from a lower cost prescription drugs. This is a family who's able to get a tailored education for their child. Or on the crisis, hey, this is a brand that does good work, had a bad day, and they're able to emerge and still move forward despite those challenges. So that's the fun stuff that we're excited about, and what's next for us.
Got it. Very nice. Listen, I appreciate you again coming on, taking some time. I look forward to chatting again in the future.
I greatly appreciate the time, and always enjoy our conversations, and look forward to talking about whatever's new and whatever's next time we meet up.
All right, Drew. Appreciate it. And we'll catch up soon. Thank you.